Good evening, and welcome to MOTS presents MOTS Ado About Nothing.
MOTS Ado About Nothing. MOTS Ado About Nothing.
Where we apply the revolutionary MOTS scale to classic and contemporary literature.
MOTS Ado About Nothing. MOTS Ado About Nothing.
This podcast contains mature content, spoilers, language. You have been warned.
Good evening, and welcome to MOTS Ado About Nothing. I am Chris Morgan, and I'm here with Jonathan Ian Manzer.
Eastern Europe gets such a bad rap.
And Scott Thurlow.
Are they building a city soon? Yes, very soon. Right now.
And tonight, on October 5th, 2017, we are going to discuss from Clive Barker's Books of Blood. I mention that because it's also his birthday.
What up, Clive? Happy birthday.
We didn't even plan this, so happy birthday, Clive. And it's the last story in Books of Blood. It's called In the Hills, the Cities. And just a little backstory. I got this when I was 14. I plowed through it in a day. I think Clive Barker is probably one of my favorite authors. I think there's a fluidity to his writing. And I'm a fan. I mean, we're all pretty much writers here, and I'm a fan of all of our writings. But Ian and my wife Beth, when I recognized there's a fluidity to your writing, and it was something that I noticed when I was first read Clive Barker. I did meet the man. He autographed this book, and I'll probably superimpose something for it.
You'll see it.
You'll see it. And I met him at Forbidden Planet when I was getting autographed Weave World. And little bit of trivia I thought was hysterical. I never forgot. He had asked us to move to the side so we could keep talking while I was signing. He was telling us about going to the MPAA with Hellraiser. And he found out that, at least in the 1980s, when it comes to a sex scene, 2 ass thrusts were okay. 3 was obscene.
It's over the line.
Yeah, so, I mean, that was over the line.
I can see why.
Yeah,
I guess.
It might imply that you're having sex.
Sure.
And one of the reasons I picked this story is because, to me, in a lot of ways, it is quintessential Clive Barker. It's got,
Sex
sex, death.
and violence.
Sex and violence. It's a literal body horror. But but Clive Barker, if you don't know, also does some very good fantasy. So there's gore, horror, absurdity, satire, and social commentary. So I think in a lot of ways this is the quintessential Clive Barker. And with that said, Ian, dost thou have a funny logline?
I don't.
No,
Scott does.
but I do. This is a way deep pull, but if you know it, monster misbehaving, cities need saving, situations grave, and wolf form the head.
Indeed. That is a really deep pull.
Yeah, so shout out if you know it. If not, let's continue.
Out of my league. And so, Ian, would you like to talk about the intro, body, and conclusion?
Yes, I would. So 2 lovers are traveling through Europe, and specifically now Eastern Europe. This takes place in the 80s, so there's all that Soviet tension and whatnot. And they're getting to the point of the travels are causing them to bicker. They end up in on the back roads of
the outskirts, I guess.
Eastern Europe, and stumble upon, perhaps, in my opinion, one of the strangest and perhaps stupidest premises for city rituals, where the cities will get together, strap each other to form giant colossi to do battle, but they do it every 10 years. Unfortunately, this time, one of the golems falls apart, causing everyone in that city to fall from the sky and die. And it causes the other Colossus to freak out and start rampaging. And the 2 main characters, the 2 lovers, witness this, and one dies and one decides to go for a ride. And that's the basic, everything that happens here. It's a very strange tale. I'm a big believer in the idea of accurate suspension of disbelief. This asks you to believe in something that I had trouble buying. I'm not saying everyone will, but personally myself, I had trouble understanding why someone would do this, or why a city would decide to do this. Granted, I've watched and I read other works that dealt with similar things that you have to like, but
I get it.
It just. I liked the two main characters and following their story. I just didn't buy the main premise of it.
I don't know. I get it. I'll address it, I guess. So I know who Clive Barker is. I just actually haven't read a lot of his stuff, which is why I thought, like, decent pick, Chris. Like, I would like to delve into some actual readings. I know, like, probably almost everyone knows Hellraiser, or at least culturally osmosis. That's where they probably recognize him from. But I've seen a couple video games, in fact, that were, like, okay based on his ideas. But I've never actually delved as deeply into him as I would have, say, like Stephen King or like Lovecraft, which everyone knows. Audiences may be familiar with my love for him. So I was interested in reading it. But I see you mean, E, for sure. I didn't feel it was like as much of a stretch. Yeah, sure, it's a stretch. But like I sort of like knew that going into this story, whatever is going to happen is going to be like something bizarre and grotesque in some way. So like I know, like I get the premise is a little like odd, to say the least. But I bought it as like a backwoods, like Eastern European village ritual, like in a sense. So like I bought more of it than you did, apparently. So
I read this book when I was 14, and at the time, I enjoyed the story. I just thought it was really, really, really weird, and it was one of these images, which is why it first came to mind for this one, that I couldn't get out of my head. I mean, bit of trivia. There's a line in here where Judd, when the political lover, says, he's sick of the smell of churches. They smell like stale incense, sweat, and lies. If you know Nine Inch Nails, it's from the song Sin. So other than that reference, I remembered the two cities as
city people, city states, if you will.
But so going into this, I said, I got to recommend this because it just is, to me, the quintessential Clive Barker. It's the one story of his, the imagery I've never been able to get out of my head. Now, 30 years later, looking back on the Cold War at the time and having read this once this week and then listened to it twice this week, I was really interested in the fact that all of a sudden these became the Western views of communism.
Yeah, I guess.
So you had the join thing, you had everybody living for the city, dying for the city, suffering for the city. It was, in a lot of ways, and I don't know if he did this intentionally, it seemed like this was like the Western view of the Soviet.
Oh, it's
bloc.
Absolutely.
So I
mean, that seemed obvious to me, but maybe it's more themes.
Yeah, no. What I'm saying is, that's probably themes. I'm probably jumping the gun here. But to me, the story all of a sudden took on a different meaning. So, because rereading this, I didn't know what to expect going into it. So I understand what you're saying completely, and I understand what you're saying completely. So having reread this, I'm like, oh, it's the thing feels differently to me at this point.
I get it. I get all that. So I fall somewhere in the middle for doing scores. It's probably going to be like a soft 2. I was thinking about a 1, but I don't think it like loses that many points. It definitely doesn't deserve a full 3, at least from me. But I think it was interesting enough and sustained itself enough throughout, even if some parts faltered, even if, like the premise itself was somewhat ridiculous. But I kind of like, again, was prepared for that going in. So I think I'll give it, like I said, a softish to solid at most.
I actually agree with you because the story does follow these two lovers, and seeing one of the things I really enjoy, and this is perhaps jumping the gun on other questions here, is their reaction to dealing with events, these events. So at first, so you basically have the two protagonists. One is a very kind of political science minded, very like kind of academic.
He's a journalist, I believe.
He called him. Mick called him politically bigoted.
Sure,
but he's very, very practical minded. Like, and the other one, was it Mick? Is more of a romantic and like artistic kind of character, and seeing their reaction. So when they think it's war, Judd wants to go straight in to witness the war, and Mick is hesitant
and so forth. Yeah.
All of a sudden, when it turns to the uncanny, Judd wants to get the heck out, and Mick becomes more and more enamored.
He's like awed by its like disgusting beauty, if you will.
Yeah, but like in the reality of it.
Yeah.
And so I like the arcs that these characters take. It's just that I guess the impetus to their arc, I don't buy necessarily, but I'm still going to give it a 2 because I did enjoy the two characters.
Yep.
I'm going to give it a 2, probably a little stronger 2 than you guys. But the thing is, with the beginning, at the beginning, both of the characters really got on my nerves. I mean,
I think that was supposed to be the effect.
I mean,
though.
yeah, that was definitely supposed to be the effect, but I don't remember what it was at the time, but I kept thinking, like, as a first-time reader, I mean, if I'm going to be objective about this, because, you know, obviously I'm a big Barker fan, if I'm going to be objective about this, I think that would have been one of, even for a short story, for a first-time reader, the beginning would have been the hardest thing for me to swallow. I mean, it was a slow burn, but I'm ultimately probably going to come on your side and give it a 2.
Yeah, all right. Well, then.
Okay. Well, Scott, I probably fucked up part of your thing, but would you like to get us into themes?
Sure. So, I mean, you sort of addressed it, yeah. And, like, I guess it's interesting because you mentioned, Chris, you said you read it when you were a kid. So you might have gotten, like, some semblance of that, but certainly not the way you would view it now as an adult. And, like, in light of, like, and this was published or written, like, 83 or 4 or something.
84, yeah.
So, like, sure, it has that sort of bent to it. It's going to have that angle, sort of that aspect to it. And that's fine. Like, I like you said, it was so somewhat obvious, like, that it was there. But I think, as Ian was saying, like, the interaction between Mick and Judd, ostensibly the main characters, I thought was interesting. Like, they're a gay couple, so, like, something you don't often see, or probably wouldn't have often seen, at least back in the 80s horror era, we'll say. So I thought it was, like, a nice little thing to include, like, a way to, like, just, it doesn't mention it at all. It's just like, hey, these are these two characters, and this is their life.
And they have a really complex relationship.
Yeah, and they have a believable, like, interaction, I agree. So, like, I don't know, like, beyond that, like, the old, if not old, like, the tropes of horror that we've discussed a lot throughout the years when we do, like, any horror work. So it's like, yeah, the body horror thing, obviously, like, almost Cronenbergian, but not quite to that degree. Like, they're not, like, mutating or anything. They're just, like, lashed together as humans and forced to work together in some weird, like giant colossus of people. And they enact a strange ritual, I guess, every decade to, like, it's almost like a, you know, Olympics to them, but it framed through, like, you know, this weird sport is only one of them. Everyone in the goddamn city of these two, like, generically named, you know, Eastern European cities gets together and lashes themselves to each other, forming a giant titan that does battle to prove what, really? It doesn't actually matter, like, in a sense. But, it's just what they do. So I think there's enough there. It says something about, like, and as Ian was saying, when faced, like, Westerners faced with, like, these, you know, the different cultures of possibly East, like any different culture really, but especially, like, East versus, like, that sort of mindset, the Cold War thing, Cold War era, you know, like, viewpoint, if you will. I think that was addressed to an enough degree, and at least it was there under the surface, if not, you know, the main point of it. And just people's general reaction to something strange and bizarre, even beyond, like, sure, they expected probably to see something odd in the countryside or, like, you know, encounter some weird people, but not to this degree, of course. And it's sort of hyper-realized. It's surreal, as he said, as well. So I think there's enough there to give it, like, a fairly solid one, at least on those themes. And if you guys get anything else, take it away.
Well, I couldn't help but draw parallels between Mick and Judd and the fact that the two of them and the two giants that were there, and in a way, the destructive nature of both the relationship between the cities and like their relationship, and the fact that they describe the monster or the giants as constantly trying to outdo each other, kind of trying to prove themselves better until it leads to the collapse and ultimate destruction of one. And one giant dies, one giant's on a run, one lover dies, one lover is, in a sense, riding.
Sort of becomes part of it, in a sense. Yeah.
So I think there's, like, parallels in the relationships. And I thought that was, considering that this is a long time out of the Cold War, hopefully, depending on what political party it is, I think that that's a great message that's timeless, that is captured in this work.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Having obviously read this in the 80s when it came out, the view of the Cold War at this time is different. Obviously, I know a lot more about politics and history at this point. But one of the things that, while you were talking, well, two things occurred to me. When Scott was talking, that this kind of, in a lot of ways, is like a Terry Gilliam animation from the old...
Yeah, I could see it being that for sure.
So there are these absurd things in, like, a normal situation. But while you were thinking, like, in terms... while you were talking, Ian, in terms of, like, the Cold War, I was like thinking, well, in a way is oddly like nuclear war in a way, because there were a couple of like near misses in the 80s. And there were things, so I kept seeing one that's just like, mutual assured destruction. One society collapses and whichever one is quote unquote the victor.
That's pretty good.
Because there was no doubt that this city was going to fall apart. It was dying as he was talking. And I like the fact that the juxtaposition between the two where, Judd thinks he's so strong but thinks Mick is weak, and all of a sudden here's the ultimate literal body politic coming at you. Yeah. And then, but it's kind of like the merging of both of their worlds right in front of them. And it just goes to show you that, Judd can't comprehend it and Mick can. I think he's just gone to the other side of
Cuckoo
Land.
He can't look away. He wants to join it now.
Yeah.
It pleases his aesthetic sensibilities.
But that's not what Rousseau meant by body politic.
This is not what he had in mind when he penned that. For sure. No, I like all that. And like you said, it just gave me an idea. This is my quick joke to my final thoughts is like all other future conflicts in modern society should be resolved by those of the states combining together and lashing themselves together. So anyway,
I would definitely like to see that.
I'm giving themes a pretty solid one.
Yeah, me too.
I agree.
Okay, so I guess it's on to me with Antagonist, and well, it's interesting because they both kind of antagonize each other.
But they're the main characters.
Yeah, and also the cities are kind of one another's antagonists, and it's kind of funny because the cities, it's sport. There's an adversarial thing there. The guy at the beginning is looking across the courtyard, saying, "That's my friend over there, and I want to go talk to him, but I can't talk to him today. He's my adversary." And it's just like, but there's tomorrow. But and the way they're both reacting to this, like when the one body falls apart, his devastation. So you've got the cities personified in these big creatures, or these big Goliaths, and you've got the cities personified in these two old men. And then that's juxtaposed with these two lovers who are basically just trying to get through this vacation. So they like have sex so they stop fighting. Or what was the other tactic? It's just like arguments that, it's just like they were living on these little things to get them through like 3-hour blocks.
They were cooped up in like a VW in the back roads of Eastern Europe and getting on each other's nerves.
Worst thing in the world.
Yeah, so they're doing anything they can to like sort of alleviate that tension.
So it's kind of hard to like say that there's one antagonist, except to say that both protagonists of both cities are each other's antagonists. So as an antagonist on both of them, it's also part of the situation when those two worlds come crashing down. I don't know. I'm going to hand this off to you because I've got some ideas going. I just can't focus them.
I have two things. I'm initially going to give this a 0, and I may still, but I may try to pull up a page from Ian's book and convince myself, perhaps, and to my old go-to abstraction of an antagonist. It's the blind adherence to antiquated rituals, which is what these cities do. So, like, nobody explains why, like, they're like, yeah, like, as you said, they're not antagonists each other. Like, it's sort of like a friendly thing. Like, hey, let's have a contest. It's almost like I said, the Olympics of this, like, random, like, backwater section of wherever one may be in Europe. But they're not, like, trying to kill each other, per se. It's more like a friendly, almost wrestling match, just composed of every fucking citizen of both cities. So, like... But why are they doing this? It's never actually explained. It's just like, this is what we've done, like, every year.
Well, they're like saying that every year, like, the thing gets bigger,
they try to
more
improve it.
elaborate.
I get that, but where did it start and why have they kept it up? So I guess it's that, and, like, maybe, like, the clash of cultures, as we said, tourists and sort of seen behind the curtain, if you will, of the lives of people they wouldn't normally interact with. But I don't think, like, it's not like Mick and Judd were trying to antagonize each other. They were just fraying at the relationship. They weren't actively trying to screw each other over. In fact, they tried to save each other when they went at the parts that was possible until it became no longer possible. And the cities weren't trying to destroy each other per se. They were destroyed by a random accident. So I think, even though like I like some of that stuff that I just said, of course, I don't think there's enough of antagonist there to make it a 1. Go ahead.
All right, so there's a mechanic in a lot of horror and fantasy as well, with establishing an area which the fantastical can still happen. Eastern Europe, probably unfairly, because I haven't been there, but I'm sure that people aren't strapped together to fight as giants.
Why not, though, is the question. Go on.
Maybe I would visit that. But like the idea of, like, especially during the Soviet era, the Eastern Europe, this like a place back in time, a place that hasn't reached modern civility, and so it's using again unfairly
that sort of stigma.
The same with the South in America, which is a place that is not civilized, where terrible things can still happen in like the swamps and whatnot. So I think I understand why people do it, because it has to give that same thing like Transylvania back during like the Dracula and things like that. But it still feels kind of cheap to me.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
And if Eastern Europe is a manufactured like antagonist in a way, again, I don't think there's a strong enough argument for anything that this can get a 1.
I was thinking about what Scott said about the adherence to antique ritual or arcane ritual, and I was thinking that, with Mick always looking back and wanting to embrace all these churches, and every single one's got virgins, everything over got incense. It's just like it was the same thing over and over again. So that, and this does not go to Antagonist. I agree with you guys. I'm probably going to give it to 0. Yeah. But I just like the fact that all of a sudden what you said took on yet another meaning to the story, because it's just more, even if there's not a direct antagonist, to have these little connections drawn, I think just kind of makes everything a little richer.
Yeah, but generally when they're attempting to use antique rituals as an antagonist, the point is driven home. Like, for instance, as you just point out very fairly, that Mick is the one who always looks back at the rituals. He's the one who survives at the end.
Right.
The forward-looking, rational Judd is killed.
It's crushed by the enactment of the ritual.
Yeah. So
sure.
If that is the intention, I feel like it was mixed signals.
Right.
Yeah, at best. I see what you mean. I also like what you said about, it's almost like the depiction of that area and like the South and all that. Like, they're almost like cliches at this point. They're fucking like dead horse tropes, and essentially, like, right? Maybe they were effective at one point, but now when you see one, like, okay, they're doing the same. Like, I've seen this already, and I know it's not really like that. They're just using it as a framework, and you're right. It does start to feel cheap after a while. So I'm giving it a 0 for Antagonist, I think.
Yeah, I think I am too, but I think I just we'll go on. Ian, would you like to tell us about our protagonists?
Well, I already did. Mick and Judd described them pretty thoroughly in the opening of this. I like them quite a bit. And you explained the thematics dealing with them before, too, both of you. I think there were fairly well-established characters. They were complex. Their relationship was complex. I understood their motivations throughout the entire thing. What happened to them was rather... everything that happens is rather happenstance in a way.
Yeah, it's like random fate.
Yeah, but shit happens, and they happen to Judd, so I'm going to give them a 1 for that.
Yeah, so I've started sort of pulling back what we did a couple episodes ago about how to view a good or effective protagonist, and I think you hit a bunch of the points, that they're well realized, believable. I bought into their relationship and like who they were as people as it got fleshed out. Even like the intro conversation was a nice way to introduce the reader to who one is, who Mick is, and who Judd is, and how they interact with each other. And yeah, I sort of like believed their increasing panic / disbelief / terror / embracement of the horror as it went on. So I think they were like pretty effective throughout, and enjoyed them as characters. So I'm going to give them a pretty solid 1.
Yeah, everything we discussed in the, especially the adherence to arcane ritual, everything I was going to finish my thought before was it enriched their 2 protagonists. Like, it would have been hard to see this story through anybody else's eyes but theirs.
Yeah, I think it was a unique choice and a well done choice.
Yeah, and I think this is going to go to style, but like one of you just said that the way they look at each other, that you do get right off the bat say like, this is what Mick thinks of Judd, this is what Judd thinks of Mick, and they both know that all they got to do is survive this vacation. So, I'm going to give them a very strong 1.
Yeah. All right.
So, Scott, we're to you with supporting characters, secondary characters.
Another strange one-ish. Like, should I count the cities themselves as such? They're like figures in the story, I guess. I guess the old man, I can't remember his name, one of the referees, I suppose.
Yeah.
Who was like sort of like in charge of like making sure nothing goes awry, and what a job he did. So... there's not much to it. Like, it's strange, like I said, because I guess I liked him. I guess I liked my favorite thing that I enjoyed was the scene where another nameless old man is going around like putting the survivors out of their misery and then blows his own brain out, which like I'm always going to love that. It's a great little detail especially for this kind of horror story. But
Save the last
he
bullet
wasn't
for
like
yourself.
a character. Yeah, he's sort of like the device. So while I liked sort of like the trappings of what whatever secondary characters there were in here, I don't know if they're actually characters unto themselves to give it credit, even though I enjoyed what was there.
I'm going to ask you a question here.
Okay.
Take out the Slavic sounding names of the or what characters you do get names for. If this had taken place with almost all the same descriptions had taken place in like Scotland or Ireland or like in the South, I don't think there's anything. Again, what do you think? There's a unique identifier to the place. We're told it's Eastern Europe,
but it could be anywhere.
It could be anywhere.
Yeah.
So, do you agree with that assessment?
Yes, I do. In fact, I didn't think about it, but now that you mention it, I do agree with that. So they're sort of like basically placeholders of what you're saying. They could be swapped out with any other thing.
Mm-hmm.
They fill the same roles, but like I said, like my initial gut reaction is just that it seems obvious they're just not as fleshed out. And while that may not necessarily be Barker's point or intent, that doesn't make for the fact that I am going to give this a 1, even though it's nothing like it's not a mark against the story per se. It's just I don't think A, it was necessary even to an extent, and B, it wasn't his intent itself. So they're just the trappings. They're just like part of the framework for the story and not the focal point, not even like important to the main action itself. So
I'm going to say that the one point where the one guy, one referee from Puljevo,
sure,
the one who's dying, he basically gives you the exposition.
That's true, but it's basically an exposition dump.
No. But I'm saying, like, integral to the story, he is important. He's not. I mean, it is exposition, but it is done in such a way where, they simultaneously want to save his life and they want him to dump everything before he dies. And I especially liked after he dies, the one little flavor is just like they're going to bury him, and Judge was like, wouldn't that look suspicious if everybody happens by? Even though the likelihood of anybody happening.
That was funny, I guess. Like a little humorous touch, I suppose, not funny. But I'm going to say to you what Ian just said to me. It could have been any character given. It could have been a random like dying townsperson from the Goliath,
right?
Giving that exposition. It doesn't actually matter. So like again, like they're sort of like one dimensional at best. Yes, he's there as a mouthpiece. His dying speech is like, "Here's what we do," and
but I also like the color. I like the color that the man in gray who shoots himself and this guy, and
yes, like I said, I enjoyed that stuff as trappings, but
but I'm just gonna say, well, I mean, in terms of secondary characters, I enjoyed him. I'm gonna give him a 1 because I see your point. I see about them not being fleshed out, that they could essentially be foils, but. As for the good stew, it's just like the flavors to it. I think they add to the color of it. I think they add to the flavor of it.
But as with a good stew, I'm saying that you're saying that, the beef is good. I'm like, yeah, but it could have been chicken. It could have been. There's nothing unique that about like the stew that the parts weren't easily replaceable in here. And
I like your
there's not a unique flavor to this.
Yeah. I like your food analogy for sure. I'm still sticking with like a softer 0 though.
I'm gonna stick with my 1.
Stew like 0.
Stew like 0.
Sure.
No, I mean I just thought, let's put it this way, I thought the seasonings that they had were appropriate. The way he put spin on it.
All right.
Because the one thing I do recommend.
Put salt and pepper on anything. It doesn't make it a unique.
But the funny thing is, like the woman, the farmer and his wife, she fed them unsalted pea soup and eggs.
Sure.
And I'm sitting there going, "Oh my god, that sounds really good."
I guess we count them as secondary, but they're still like again just props.
No. I'm just saying that, like, maybe it's a softer one, but I'm still gonna give them a 1.
Yeah, fair enough.
And so it is to me with dialogue, and I like the dialogue. Obviously, to me, it's just like, if we're going to talk quotes, the fact that that one line was pulled by 9 Inch Nails. So if anybody's a 9 Inch Nails fan and has ever heard that one line about stale incense,
now you know where it's from.
Now you know where it's from. But otherwise, I like the dialogue a lot. I thought it was very naturalistic. I like the old man at the beginning, even the internal dialogue, where he was having his cup of coffee and he's looking over his friend saying, "I can't be his friend today." And I thought to me, dialogue has to, at the very least, serve its purpose and be natural to being outstanding and have, basically being quotes and poetry. Otherwise, if it falls flat, if I can't remember any dialogue, if I don't care what they're saying, I would give it a 0. But I'm going to say that there's enough column A, column B to give this a 1 for me.
I'm not sure. I'm pretty wavering on this one, so maybe I'll let E convince me one way or another. I see what you're saying, Chris, and I thought it was fairly solid. Certainly not bad or cringeworthy or, unpleasant in any other way. Just, I don't know, if it was grab-worthy to sort of parse it out. Yes, I did like Mick and Judd's exchanges. I thought that was the most believable part. The rest of it, though, I might take points away here and put them into style. I think that might be how I'm cutting it up now. Because, it was, again, my old chestnut, it was serviceable. So it was fine. But it wasn't quite standout. But it also was perfectly believable. But that means they're saying, somewhat mundane things throughout. Even though the relationship is fleshed out via it, at least Mick and Judd's, like I said. It's a tough one, so I'll let you go.
So the only thing I'm counting really here is Mick and Judd's dialogue.
Okay.
Because I think anything else is kind of incidental to the
sorry,
plot.
You didn't like when Judd said, sorry, it was one of his lines actually, so
Yes.
my bad.
You can read it off now if you want.
Judd says when they're arguing, after the dying old man gives them the exposition dump and trying to figure out what exactly he was talking about, he says, it's a metaphor, it was some Trotskyish tripe. Which I thought was funny when I read it, but...
And yes, it's very believable dialogue, but it is also very characterful. You understand who these people are from the way they describe things, from the way they talk about things. You get the distinct personalities of Judd and Mick. This is a short story. I'm not expecting to be it's a horror story at that. And I thought it went above and beyond the just providing you information. It also provided with character development. And for that, I'm going to give it a 1.
All right. Yeah, you convinced me. The strength of both your arguments. Like I said, I was pretty wavering. I wasn't sure what to make of it. But I think based on what you just said and thinking about it quickly, going back in my mind, I think it does get there. So I'm going to give it a 1.
Yeah, for this, I always use the alien analogy where it's natural. There's nothing stand out. A couple lines that you may aren't super quotable, but they do. They everything Ian said about character development. So I'll stop there. So yeah.
All right.
And
I think it is.
Speaking of Ian, how would you like to tell us about the style?
So you already said almost everything I had to say about style with the fluidity. Dude. No, whatever. No. It's a very fluid piece. I specifically like the introduction where Judd and Mick quickly change the narrative point of view. That you don't always know who's speaking until maybe the next line afterwards, and it quickly shifts its third-person narrative view, and it kind of has this rolling style with it. Granted, as a horror work, if you like Clive Barker, this is very Clive Barker, as you said. It has all of the
quintessential, as he said.
Yeah, it's the quintessential.
This sadomasochistic sexuality. It has the gratuitous violence. Not necessarily my cup of tea, but I respect it for what it is. And that's what I had to say about style.
I'm sorry I stole your fire on a couple of different levels.
You have to have a battle as yourselves as giant cities. No, I mostly agree. So like I said earlier, I haven't read a lot of Clive Barker, and what I have read must have been many years ago. So it was nice to actually delve into something more recently and analyze it as we're doing. And I do think it has a bit of a poetic flow to it, as you guys said. It's just seems obvious, and as analysts of literature, it seems like that's the effect he's going for, and achieves it more often than not. In fact, a lot. And he's sort of, like I said, again, not like he's king-like, but there's something about it that is just generally, both of them, and especially this story, somewhat hypnotic. It draws you in. It keeps you going along, right? And never once did I stop and want to take a break or anything. I was, yeah, like I said, I was following the whole story and I was drawn into it, even though the absurd parts of it were like still, I was realizing them, recognizing them, but the I guess the cognitive dissonance wasn't enough to break me out of it. So never was I lost immersion or anything. And yeah, I at the end of the day, I do think his style holds up very nicely, and perhaps I will read more of him if I have time after this. But overall, I think I'm going to give it a damn solid 1.
I agree. I stole some fire, but I think that's I think it's the strongest thing, and I think Clive Barker is a very substantial storyteller. I highly recommend reading Damnation Game and The Great and Secret Show. Those are my 2 personal recommendations. There is a fluidity to his writing, and that's one thing. And I know I kind of like patted you and Beth on the back at the beginning, but this is what always
any writing that contains that, like, I'm going to like, and we probably all are. And
this is the first author that I read that really I felt that it was very fluid. He's very colorful. You don't really, to me, he's like to me he's kind of like Dickens in light, because Dickens says in many, many words, and you can picture everything, but he says it in many, many words, whereas Barker to me always felt like in fewer words he could paint as rich of a picture.
Yeah, he's succinct but still not clipped, I guess I'll say.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm giving style 1. Obviously I'm a huge fan, so I could talk about this for an hour and I won't.
Sure. Well, it's on to you anyway for a recommendation.
No,
isn't it?
On to you for recommendation, sir.
It is on to me. Well, yeah, I guess I would in a sense, but it's weird because, as you just mentioned, I guess anyone who is already a fan has read this or maybe more. So, yeah, I guess I'd say if you're not as familiar as I wasn't, like just at least in his actual writings, yeah, give this one a check out. But maybe there's better stuff out there that I might get into. But this one itself, I think I'll steal something from you. It's a pretty good introductory story to Barker, like just in general. And maybe if you're a big fan, it's a good one to read again if you haven't in a while. So either way, I think I'll give it a pretty solid 1 for recommendation. Yeah, check out In the Hills to Cities.
I second what Scott said. I have nothing to add.
I recommended it. I highly recommend this. Just a caveat: it is in Books of Blood, and the first story of Books of Blood kind of tells you what the Books of Blood are, but none of these stories really have to do with that. So these stories can be read in isolation. You don't have to read the whole book, which is one of the reasons that I recommended it to you, and I wanted to bring that up in case anybody's a Clive Barker fan.
I'm always fond of short story collections as well.
So in case anybody's a Clive Barker fan and said, well, what about the first story? And you don't really need to read it. To go back and start with this is great. Obviously there's a bunch of stuff I can remember, or I could recommend. The novella Hellbound Heart, which is the basis for Hellraiser. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, obviously I recommend this.
And speaking of Hellraiser, look out for something related to it later on this season.
Yeah. during October Madness for the Lost Signals.
So look out for that.
So Ian, would you like to give us our scores?
All right, Scott and I both give it a 7, and you give it an 8, giving it a 7.33 overall.
No, that's fair.
Just a damn solid story, above average, and a good horror story.
It's an early work. It's probably
slightly above average.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's an early work. It's what you'd expect. It's quintessential. Sure. He's, So, does anybody have anything to add?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay, well, I'm Chris Morgan. I've been here with Scott Thurlow.
And I'll be lashing myself to a city of peasants sometime soon. See you next time.
Jonathan Niemanzer.
Good night.
Happy birthday, Clive.
Editing and engineering by Christopher Morgan. Music by Christopher Morgan. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates.